Hello and welcome to today's Hindu newspaper analysis of the Delhi edition from the editorial section. Okay, and appetite for war but no place for peace. Okay, millennia after Ashoka's bill articulated moral discourse against war, the word is far from walking the talk. What is gist of this article? News has just beamed on television screens that Putin has called off the war, expressed remorse at what he has done, deeply regretted the horror he unleashed. He has also publicly apologized for mass murders and for the suffering he had caused to survivors. This has a tremendous impact on other modern warrior politicians. George Bush and Tony Blair both apologized for the devastation they caused in Iraq. Suddenly, we humans are on the verge of a dramatic, revolutionary change in our perspective on the world and the way we think about ourselves. This is a genuine step towards a peaceful world, one in which wars have no place and violations, conquest are a thing of the past. समझ गए? अहिंसा ने अतीत को जीता है. I have allowed my utopian imagination to take flight despite an ongoing brutal war that impacts the entire world. Hardly a good time for moral self-indulgence, and I feel justified because something like this has occurred at least once when around 260 before Christ era, Ashoka's famously renounced war and conquest. समझ गए? अशोका ने युद्ध करने के बाद सोचा ठान लिया कि हमको युद्ध नहीं करना है. ओके. Ordinary people have railed against war even since. Massive popular protests against wars have been witnessed in our own times, but there is no other instance, to my knowledge, when a conqueror denounces his own actions and take humankind in a new moral direction. समझ गए? तो हमेशा एक कंडीशन रही है कि एक बड़े सम्राट ने या बड़े नेता ने हमेशा जब भी इतिहास में युद्ध किया है तो कहीं न कहीं उसने बाद में क्षमा याचना जरूर मांगने की कोशिश की, क्योंकि उसमें निर्दोष लोगों का नुकसान होता है. इट टुक ए कैटालिस्मिक एक्ट टू ट्रांसफॉर्म अशोका, फॉर अंटिल देन ही वाज हिमसेल्फ ए फॉलोअर ऑफ द वॉरियर एथिक. इन प्री अशोकान इलीट culture, hyper-masculine virtues were eulogized in the Rig-Vedic. Indra, the god of the sky, rain and thunder, who being strong and violent is also the god of war. इंद्र को ऋग्वैदिक पीरियड में अशोका के पहले के समय की बात करें तो युद्ध का और आंधी तूफान का देवता माना जाता था. Blessed with a muscular, shy and terrifying demeanor, he through sheer brawn is able to push apart from world two halves, heaven and earth. Religious primordial waters split open the cosmic mountain so as to free imprisoned sunlight and cattle. With his Oja, a Sanskrit word signifying both physical strength and power of dominate. Indra pulverizes rivals to politically subjugate the enemy. He happily destroys, crushes, splits apart, slays, and breaks his spirit. Real men take Indra, the most important by the god, as role model are called Shura, also known as big, strong men, champion. They are skilled in horse and chariot combat. They flex muscles in cattle riding expeditions and glorify warfare. Here violence and conquest are a way of life. बात समझ गए? यहाँ अहिंसा और जीत जिंदगी के तरीके हैं. Here violence and conquest are way of life. Inventions of someone else's territory and its occupation are considered entirely legitimate. समझ गए? यहाँ एक ने दूसरे पर आक्रमण करना, उसके क्षेत्र का अधिग्रहण कर लेना ही एक लेजिटिमेट संपूर्णता समझी जाती है. एंटी वार कॉन्शियसनेस, युद्ध विरोधी चेतना कैसे हो सकती है? Ashoka himself followed this ethic until the conquest of Kalinga. Then the scale of Batan destruction, the displacement of 150,000 people, and the death of at least 1 lakh left him distraught and changed his perspective. On conquering Kalinga, the beloved of the god Ashoka felt remorse for when an independent country is conquered. The slaughter, death, and deportation of the peoples is extremely grievous. All survivors suffer violence, murder, and separation from their loved ones. Even those who are fortunate to have escaped its direct impact suffer from the misfortunes of their friends, acquaintances, colleagues and relatives. Thus the war had tragic consequences for practically every resident of Kalinga. He goes on to say, even if thousands of that many were to be slaughtered or deported today, it would have weighed heavily on his mind. Romila Thapar is a historian. Romila Thapar rightly notes in his book that regret and remorse at the suffering in Kalinga is not the regret of a man moved by a passing emotion, but the meaningful contrition of a man who was consciously aware of the sorrow he caused. Henceforth, Ashoka publicly denounced the glorification of conquest and dismissed the idea that fame and glory are goods in themselves. The only kind of fame and glory he wished for is one and is achieved by obeying and following the Dhamma, that is public and political morality. Dhamma is equal to public and political morality. From now on, central to the king Dhamma is Sarvjana or Shab Loka Hita, welfare of all living beings in this world and hereafter. War and conquest upset the physical security of humans as well as the violent pursuit of these goods. Therefore, these must be achieved. True glory lies in elevating life-sustaining goods of ordinary persons above power and conquest. Thus, by formulating Dhamma, Ashoka attempts to reshape the Brahma Kshatriya masculine culture in its entirety. By rejecting the warrior ethnic, Ashoka launched a radically new vision of kinship in his violence became a continent, rather than a necessary constructive feature. In Ashoka's ethic, wars, organized violence between or against groups bring chaos and devastation. They do not spring from human nature or they intrinsic to the human condition. They stem from insatiable greed and gargantuan ambition. Although it is hard to imagine a world without anger and aggression or conflict-free human condition, multiple ways exist to manage and contain them. Large-scale violence and war are avoidable. Humanity refusal to learn. Humanity refusal to learn. At the human species refused to learn. समझ गए? मानव जाति सीखने से मना करती है. Alternatives to organized violence stare us in the face, but powerful rulers carry on regardless. Worse, they invariably justify their cruelty, offer puerile rationalizations, and necessarily reinforce the belief that bar is a part of human nature and violence, okay, ingrained in our DNA. A subtler justification of bar point out good result its begets. Did not the position of women improve after the Second World War? Did bar not get Europe its welfare state? Did it not improve longevity by improvement in education, technology and medicine? These arguments are absurd. Of course, bad things have unintended consequences that may in the long run be good for us. But that is not reason enough to aim to bring about bad. We must seek out the best peaceful alternatives to secure the good. In any case, we cannot forget that bars are instigated by strong ambitions meant to legitimate the weak into giving up something generally valuable. Bars bring devastation to the mining in order to bring enormous material gas to the few. It is therefore painful to see our elected governments pay backwards lip service to peace. At international fora, we condemned act of bar and pontificate on their futility, but in the same breath we ridicule peacemakers as effeminate. Our public discourse continued to be replete with the glorification of machine show. No respite from bars. Ironically, human awareness is against the inevitability of bar has grown at a time when the frequency and scale of bar have increased exponentially. The 20th century can be aptly described as the age of bar. With the first quarter of age of bar. With the first quarter of 21st century already an extension of 21st century. I will not be surprised if not a single day in the last 100 odd days be passed without large scale violence and destruction in one or other part of the world. पिछले सालों में कोई ऐसा दिन नहीं गुजरा जब अहिंसा और युद्ध हुआ हो. And not a single year since the so-called long peace has passed in which most powerful countries in the world have not bombed one or the other of their perceived enemy. Ordinary people in some of the other regions of the world have suffered its brutal consequences long after formal war is over. It is more than 2,000 years. It is more than 2,000 years since we developed a well-articulated moral consequences against war. But humanity is now here. Near walking the talk. समझ गए? Near walking the talk. बातचीत करने के आसपास टहल रही है. This article written by Rajiv Bhargava is a political theorist and an honorary fellow, Center for the Study of Developing Societies in New Delhi. Rajiv Bhargava is a eminent writer. Sometimes they write articles in Hindu newspapers regarding important questions and important discourse which are mentioned in our society at that time. And not our society but in the world. A negation of the individual and collective. Let's move to another article. A negation of the individual and a collection moral decay. Handing down the death sentence in cursory manner and the ensuing public silence are cause for concern. What is this? What is gist of this article? Last week, a little over 13 years after the blast in 2008, okay, in July 2008, in Ahmedabad, Gujarat, the designated court to conduct a speedy trial decided to the fate of 78 of the accused people. The Sessions Court building turned into a fortress on the day of the verdict. Unlike other days, people were frisked before they were allowed on the court premises. But in this seeming silence and secrecy on a video conference link, 49 people were convicted. When those adjudicated guilty were asked if they had anything to say, most spoke with fondness about their family members. Many recounted their clean jail records and educational qualifications. Some pleaded innocence. Many broken down and begged for mercy. समझ गए? Within a week, the court sentenced 38 of 49 people to death in a judgment that was 7,015 pages long. एक ऐसा जजमेंट जो 7,015 पेजों का था, written entirely in गुजरात, पूरा गुजरात में लिखा गया. Okay, गुजरात, the court perfunctorily read out the names of the convicts almost like as a school roll call. Tie a noose around the neck and the hanging convict until he is dead, making it one of the most jeering cases in the history of the independent India of the use of discretion to sentence citizens to death. According to a report by Project 39A at the National Law University, Delhi, a total of 488 prisoners in India as of 2021 were on the death row, which is an increase of nearly 21% from 2020. In one fellow show, the unprecedented verdict of the courts in Ahmedabad has now added a near 10% increase to this number. It is also a reflection of the growing trend of trial courts to curiously hand down the death sentence. Degree of retributive justice. What is degree of retributive justice? Debates on the death sentence often focus on its efficacy or constitutionality, but even the liberal critics sidesteps the central issue. The death sentence grants the state the monopoly of violence. This monopoly is justified by claiming that such a step prevents crime or that it is a measure of long due justice. But at its core, death as a punishment for the rarest of rare crimes is the highest measure of retributive justice in criminal law, based entirely on discretion. Fundamentally, rarest of rare is a standard that allows a court of law to use public sentiment as a judicially reliable standard in handing out the death sentence. India's carrier criminal justice jurisprudence requires a court to calculate proportionally between crime and punishment. But here is a sentence that goes beyond the confines of these calculations to deprive a person of their life committing an act of whole central value. It is immeasurable. Justice P.N. Bhagwati pointed to this in his dissent from the majority Supreme Court view, in Bachcha Singh versus State of Punjab in 1980, in a remark that discretion is a poor substitute for principle. He held that any standard setting to explain when an institution can kill someone defeats the moral imperative to do no harm. Thus, instead of lifting the moral atmosphere of society, the rarest of rare standard gives an institution the power to bracket people as those who deserve to live imprisoned and those who deserve to institutionally killed. The impossibility of reform, the heinous nature of the crime, the shock to the public conscience, none of these things sufficiently justify the right of a fallible institution to take someone's life. The harm of this loose standard is on full display in this verdict, under discussion. After the verdict is delivered in any criminal trial, law make what are called, mitigating arguments, essentially to contextualize the convict as individual and not as the accused. In this case, first the court oral convicted an image on mass several of the accused instead of declaring the charges proved against them separately. That is, out of the 78 accused, 49 were convicted, but the point of calling it an in mass is because it was done in groups based on charges and not for each accused, consequently not indicating the individual roles of the accused. It then directed the defense to commerce strengthening argument without access to the lengthy written judgment that concerned a specific finding of the court. By depriving the defense of the verdict, the court crippled even the possibility of making a proper mitigation argument. In a bizarre turn of events, the prosecution argued that the defendants should argue for mitigation before it would discourse. Evidence of immunity. So this is most important article regarding this. This is sufficient, not to requirement to any discuss again. And next, lines and rules. Time may have come for clarifying the role and functions of the governors. Losing steam. Latest GDP numbers reflect a flattening recovery even as Ukraine crisis heightens risk, and the Libyan imbroglio sets more complicated. Peace requires a level of leadership. Peace requires a level of leadership and statesmanship. Statesmanship मतलब politician rajneta that has not been apparent for several years. Libya's deeply divided politics to a turn over the bizarre when on February 10 it acquired two prime ministers. This marks the culmination of the vulnerabilities that have defined the country for the last 8 years. It has had two centers of power, two armed forces, two central banks, one controlling the treasury and other printing the currency, and two rival international coalitions that have influenced politics. In the east, there is the House of Representatives, also known as HOR, in the Tobruk, that is headed by the Speaker, Anguilla Saleh. It is backed by the Libyan National Army, also known as LNA, under self-styled Field Marshal Khalifa Haftar. In the west, the government of National Accord in Tripoli. Tripoli is the capital of the Libya, was the executive authority in February last year. It was replaced by the government of the national unity. The broken country has provided a home for several of the region's disgruntled militants. Disgruntled militants. Disgruntled means counterpanthy militant, who have joined its various bearing groups. These have included militants who were hostile to Chad's President Idriss Deby. One such group, the Front for Change and Concord in Chad, FACT, on April 11, 2021, crossed over from its base in Libya into Chad. In the ensuing conflict, the veteran president was killed, signaling prolonged instability in the Sahel region. Libya divided. Till recently, the GNA in Tripoli, which had some ideological affiliations with the Muslim Brotherhood, was backed by a part of National Army and local militia, and was supported by Turkey and Qatar. It controls the northwest of Libya, including Tripoli and Misrata. Tripoli and Misrata comes in Libya. Who is the African country? The Tobruk administration, Tobruk is a city. The Tobruk administration controls the east, center and south of the country. It is hostile to the Brotherhood and committed to fighting extremists, particularly those linked to the Islamic State. It thus enjoyed the support of the UAE, Egypt, France, and US, and Russia. In April 2019, the Mr. Haftar, backed by his foreign sponsors and Russian mercenaries, mercenaries from the private banger groups, had mounted a major military effort to bring the country under his control. By November 2019, he had reached the outskirts of Tripoli. His march was halted by the GNA agreement with Turkey for military assistance. Turkey even flew in several hundreds of its Afghan soldiers and a few thousand militants from Syria and forced Mr. Haftar to retreat. A ceasefire was arranged under UN auspices in October 2020. In February last year, the UN Special Envoy for Libya facilitated the setting up of an interim government, the GNU in Tripoli, headed by the Prime Minister Abdul Hamid Dbeya, that would include members from the East and West. However, contrary to the earlier proposal, instead of finalizing a new constitution, the HOR Speaker Saleh ultimately issued a new election land and decreed that only presidential elections would take place on December 24, thus ensuring that the HOR would remain unchanged and he would retain his authority. The presidential election threw up three principal candidates: Mr. Haftar, Safa Islam Gaddafi, and the former ruler's son and Mr. Prime Minister, Devavi himself. All of them were controversial. Mr. Haftar's democratic credentials were doubtful. Mr. Saif al-Islam banged on the nostalgia for the order security during the father's rule and NMC about the attendant tyranny. On becoming Prime Minister, Mr. Devaiyah assured he would not be a candidate for the presidency. Besides this, he also declined to resign from his post 3 months before the elections. As required by the electoral decree, none of these candidates enjoyed a nationwide support. 2 days before the election, the Election Commission declared that, taking into account technical, judicial and security reports, it would be impossible to hold elections on the approved date. This has set the stage for the current imbroglio. Mr. Saleh, a complicated set of externals. Outlook for Libya. लीबिया के परिणाम क्या हो सकते हैं? Libya is once again experiencing the one state two government situation. समझ गए? Libya is once again experienced that one state two governments. स्टेटमेंट याद कर लो, one state two governments लीबिया के संदर्भ में. Situation of earlier times. The reason for optimism, that is for the first time in the several years we could have a government that straddles the east-west divide with the support of the external powers. But the outlook is uncertain. Mr. Debi Bah shows no sign of going quietly into the sunset. He has announced several populist measures and set out a detailed plan to take forward a transparent political process. He is also mobilizing militants' loyalty to him and was banned for a bar if he is forced out of office. The HOR, meanwhile, he has said it will meet government. The prospect of renewed conflict cannot be ruled out. Peace and national unity in Libya require a level of leadership and a trade statesmanship that has not been apparent in the country for several years. लीबिया में शांति और राष्ट्रीय एकता के लिए हमें एक ऐसे नेता की जरूरत है और एक ऐसे राजनीतिज्ञता की जरूरत है जो कि वहां कई सालों से है ही नहीं. इसलिए जरूरी है कि लीबिया में जो सिचुएशन चल रही है, वन स्टेट टू गवर्नमेंट्स, एक राज्य दो सरकारें चल रही हैं, इसको ध्यान में रखते हुए एक बेहतरीन राजनीतिज्ञ की जरूरत है. दैट इज मोस्ट द अलार्मिंग राइज ऑफ फूड शेयर्स. ऑल्सो लेट्स मूव टू अनदर आर्टिकल. Spells of impoverishment during the pandemic were not infrequent, and lower caste and minorities bore the brunt of it. Let's slightly come only in short way. Few observations survive the test of time. Fewer gain significance over time. Angel's law. Okay, Angel's law, this was a famous, okay, philosopher. Angel's law is a case in point. A version is that the poorer a family, the greater the proportion of the total outgo, okay, which must used for food. The proportion of the outgo used for the food, other things being equal, is the best measure of the material standard of living a population. That this quotation, okay, argued by the Angel's law. Based on this law, our objective is to examine the spell of impoverishment during the pandemic in India. Our analysis is based on the CMIE, okay, Consumer Price Index, Consumer Pyramid Household Survey, January 29 and 2021. Okay, basically our explanation depend on this situation. It is not just food expenditure that differ, but also diets. Okay, the caste-based hierarchy is deep-seated in India. भारत में जाति आधारित सोपान बहुत गहराइयों तक है, with the Brahman and the upper other caste at the top, and the scheduled caste, also known as scheduled tribe, scheduled caste SC and scheduled tribe ST at the bottom. हमारे यहाँ जाति व्यवस्था एक ऐसी व्यवस्था है जिसमें टॉप पर ब्राह्मण और क्षत्रिय आते हैं और बॉटम में सबसे नीचे हिस्से में शेड्यूल कास्ट और शेड्यूल ट्राइब आते हैं. ट्रेडिशनली ब्राह्मण और वेजिटेरियन, परंपरागत तरीके से ब्राह्मण वेजिटेरियन थे, वाइल SC ST आर नॉट वेजिटेरियन. परंपरा ऐसी मानी जाती है कि ब्राह्मण आर वेजिटेरियन, बस SC ST आर नॉट वेजिटेरियन. हिंदू इन इंडिया आर बेटर ऑफ देन मुस्लिम एन एवरेज. हिंदुओं की दशा भारत में औसत दर्जे से मुसलमानों से बेहतर है. वाइल मैनी हिंदू आर वेजिटेरियन, बहुत से हिंदू वेजिटेरियन है. मैनी आल्सो ईट मीट विद द एक्सेप्शन ऑफ बीफ. बहुत से मीट खाते हैं तो उनमें बहुत से मांस भी खाते हैं, कुछ अपवाद भी है. मुस्लिम्स आर नॉन वेजिटेरियन एंड अलाउड टू ईट ऑल काइंड ऑफ मीट एक्सेप्ट पोर्क. मुस्लिम जो है वो नॉन वेजिटेरियन है, वो सभी प्रकार के मीट मछली खाते हैं, केवल शुगर को छोड़कर सभी खाते हैं, सब कुछ खाते हैं. Rise in food shares. Okay, the shock of the pandemic caused breakdowns in food supply chain and a fall in food demand, a consequences of loss of income. Yet subsistence of food requirements had to meet. Amidst the misery, food principle is spiked as the war speculative hoarding by food sellers and panic buying by consumers. The lockdown resulted in a sharp rise in food share across rural and urban India among all socio-economic groups comprising various caste and religious but at different rates. Among scheduled caste household in rural areas, the food share ranged from 46% to 54% before March 2020. However, it surged to about 64% in April 2020, coinciding with the first national lockdown. Similar trends were observed among the ST category, other backward classes, OBC and others. In urban areas, it was the OBC and others who saw a sharp rise. One reason for the opposing results in rural and urban India could be the shift of expenditure in urban areas by the upper caste, to home cooked food, a change in lifestyle forced by the lockdown and fear of the pandemic. Once restrictions were lifted, there was a sharp decline in food share, across all groups. While this decline continued in August 2021, food shares were still higher than pre-pandemic levels. However, the extent of contradiction differed between rural and urban areas and among different castes. To illustrate the food and share of scheduled caste recorded the sharpest contradiction, followed by other ST and OBC. In urban areas, the fall was steepest among the ST, followed by the other scheduled caste and OBC. During the peak of the first wave, September 2020, और जो कोरोना की पहली वेव सितंबर 2020 में आई थी, फूड एक्सपेंडिचर सेल्स डिक्लाइंड अमंग ऑल हाउस होल्ड इन अर्बन एरियाज, और जो खाद्य व्यय थी वो अपने पतन की स्थिति में जाने लग गया. इन रूरल एरियाज, शेड्यूल्ड कास्ट एंड शेड्यूल्ड ट्राइब्स आर राइज इन फूड शेयर्स डिस्पाइट रिलैक्सेशन ऑफ रेस्ट्रिक्शंस सून आफ्टर. Food shares declined across all castes until November 2020, followed by a slightly deeper rise which peaked during the second wave, especially in urban areas. Different religious groups also experienced a sharp rise in the share of food expenditure in both rural and urban areas. The shares of food among rural Hindu households ranged from 44% to 52 prior to March 2020, and among urban Hindus households from 40% to 49%. These shares spiked to over 61%, over 59% in April 2020. Respectively, the shares of the Muslim in rural areas ranged from 48% to 58% and urban areas 45% to 52% prior to the first lockdown. They rose to about 66% and 62% in April 2020. Respectively, the increase were almost double of those in rural areas. At the onset of the pandemic, urban areas were hit harder than rural areas in terms of rising COVID-19 cases. समझ गए? गांव की अपेक्षा शहरों में कोरोना के केस ज्यादा आए, which may have led to greater shift in food budget expenditure in urban area household. और जिसी के चलते ज्यादातर खाद्य की सामग्री, खाद्य की खपत शहरी क्षेत्र में होने लगी. After April 2020, the shares declined gradually until November 2020 with a steady rise across all religions in both rural and urban areas during the second wave, with a peaking of the shares in May 2020. और जो सेकेंड वेव आई वो मई 2021 में आई थी. उस टाइम ह्यूज डिक्लाइन देखने को मिला. नथिंग डिफाइंड कैन बी inferred about the impact of the third wave except that it was less severe than the previous waves. It is thus not unlikely that food shares may have risen slightly as the informal sector and employment remained sluggish and the food supply chains were far from fully restored. Spurts of higher food share are alarming for three reasons. Inferior cereals are substituted for expensive cereals. Lower amounts are spent on more nourishing foods such as fruits and vegetables, and other essential non-food items such as education and health care are neglected. इनको भी neglect किया गया. The spells impoverishment during the pandemic were not infrequent, and lower caste and minorities bore the brunt of it. The budget 2022 and 2023 is a mixed bag as it seeks to promote growth through investment but neglects deficiency of a aggregate demand, especially among the deprived weather. This is a lack of sensitivity to the plight of the disadvantaged or a misguided growth strategy of growth, or perhaps both requires a deeper scrutiny. So this article is sufficient from here, and let's move to an last scene of this article. Text and context portion. IPC sounds another climate warning. Kaise? What is gist of this article? The scientific assessment is that between 3.3, how will the world recover from the ecological catastrophe caused due to rising world temperature? The scientific assessment is that between 3.3 and 3.6 billion people live in areas that are highly vulnerable to climate change. This includes people living along coastline that are threatened by cyclones and floods. Currently, between 3% and 14% of the entire world population face a very high risk of extinction at even 1.5% degree centigrade, with the devastating losses at higher temperature. Climate resilient development is the answer to these problems, as it would help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and will raise sufficient climate finance. What is the story so far? On February 27, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate issued a major report that reviewed the scientific evidence on natural, ecological, sociological, economic spheres, concluding that climate change has already produced irreversible losses and damage to land, coastal and marine ecosystem. This new report, which assesses the prospects for the planet if global average surface temperature exceeds 1.5 degrees centigrade from the pre-industrial era, warns of severe consequences to food supply, human health, biodiversity, loss and integrity of the natural environment. If carbon emissions from human activity are not sharply reduced and government lack the political will to review their policies, what are the key features of the report? Using the time frames of near term, mid term and long term effects of climate change caused by average temperature exceeding 1.5 degrees centigrade. Working Group 6 proposes urgent actions that the world's leaders must take. Okay, must take. So, what is gist of this? The Russian invasion is making global chip shortage situation worse. Will the crisis further deepen as the war escalates? How will the world cope with the colossal shortage? What is gist of this article? Ukraine supplies rare gases used to produce semiconductor fiber lasers, and Russia exports palladium to make semiconductors. Thus, contribution from both countries is required to build chipsets that power automobiles and smartphones. As Russia invaded Ukraine, जैसा कि रसिया ने यूक्रेन पर आक्रमण कर दिया, it got hit by the various Western sanctions. This could disrupt the country's exports, leaving the semiconductor firms fewer options to source raw materials to make chipsets. Though various government policies can help to solve the chip crunch in the long run, the current semiconductor shortage is here to stay with us in the near future. Okay, what is last article? Doctors for rural India. Inducting licentiate medical practitioners may be solution to the chronic shortage of doctors in rural India. Yes. What is this? Introducing a short-term course in modern medicine can help in designing a medical curriculum that is relevant to the nation's needs. Its entry requirements could be based on aptitude for medical services. Primary health centers can employ medical officers, also known as MBBS, and new recruits can be trained in basic clinical specialties. Licentiate medical practitioners, also known as LAMP, could be allowed to study further by taking up a postgraduate course in primary care. Those with a postgraduate qualification could serve as a faculty in medical colleges training LMP. समझ गए एक situation हो सकती. What is the story so far? As the need for more quality and medical institutions is being debated upon in my country, the key issues of shortage of doctors in rural areas can be addressed by the inducting licentiate medical practitioners. Says this article by Shoham D. Bhanduri, dated February 19, 2018 में दिया था. Nearly 600 million people in India, mostly the rural areas, have little or no access to health care. समझ गए, करीबन 600 मिलियन लोगों के पास. Widespread disregard for norms, a perpetual failure to reach targets, and an air of utter helplessness are what marks the state of rural health care today. One can add to this another fact: the country is short of nearly 5 lakh doctors. समझ गए? Among the range of measures that have been suggested in the past decade is a rather promising proposal which has been sidelined. If properly implemented, it may provide rural India with a lasting pool of primary care physicians. समझ गए? So this concludes for today's Hindu newspaper analysis. Thanks for watching.